Hey friends, tonight's story is one you might think you already know, the legend of Hercules, but you've probably never heard it told like this. Not in a classroom, not in a movie, and definitely not in the way your teacher rushed through it. No, tonight you'll hear the full myth. Slowly, calmly, in all its strange detail. The parts that are boring, the parts that are absurd, and the parts that make you wonder how anyone thought this made sense. Before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I always love seeing who's drifting off with us from all over the world. So dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft background hum. Settle under the blankets and let's wander into the world of Greek mythology together. You didn't just stumble into a legend of a strong man. No, you've walked straight into a story that's stranger, sleepier, and far more peculiar than you expected. The story begins in a way that does not hurry. Myths rarely hurry, they linger. They circle back, and they remind you of details you already heard before, as if the storyteller forgot they had said it once. And so tonight, the birth of Hercules begins not with loud fanfare, but with something quieter, something slower, and perhaps even a little confusing, because in the world of Greek myths, confusion is almost a law of nature. Hercules was the son of Zeus. That is the fact that people usually remember first. Zeus, the king of the gods, the ruler of thunder and lightning, the one whose decisions always seem to cause trouble. Zeus was not known for being faithful. He had a wife, Hera, who was very aware of his habits. And yet, despite this awareness, every time Zeus wandered away from Olympus, Hera found herself furious all over again. It is one of the great patterns of mythology. Zeus strays, Hera fumes, and somewhere on Earth, a child is born into a story they never asked for. Hercules was one of those children. The mother of Hercules was a mortal woman named Alcmene. She was known for her kindness, her beauty, and her patience. Patience was a very necessary trait when dealing with Zeus. At the time, Alcmene was married to a man named Amphitryon, who happened to be away on a military campaign. This left room for Zeus to enter the story, and Zeus was not the sort of figure who ignored opportunities. He disguised himself as Amphitryon and visited Alcmene. The disguise was convincing enough, but there was a divine twist to it. In some tellings of the myth, Zeus stretched the night into 3 nights, just to enjoy the moment longer. Ordinary men do not usually adjust the length of night and day, but Zeus was not ordinary. The result of this extended night was the conception of Hercules. Now, when a child is born of both divine and mortal parents, the circumstances are rarely peaceful. Hera, the goddess of marriage, queen of the gods, and long-suffering wife of Zeus, was not delighted at the news. In fact, not delighted might be the gentlest possible way to put it. Hera despised Hercules before he had even drawn his first breath. You see, Hera collected grudges the way some people collect little trinkets. Small slights, great betrayals, imagined offenses. It did not matter. Once Hera decided you were on her list, you remained on it forever. Hercules, without doing anything at all, had found himself at the very top. When the time came for Hercules to be born, Hera was ready with her interference. She delayed Alcmene's labor, stretching it out painfully. At the same time, she made certain that another child, Eurystheus, was born early. Eurystheus was a cousin of Hercules, weaker and smaller, but thanks to Hera's intervention, technically older, and the rules of inheritance, that small difference mattered. It meant that Eurystheus, not Hercules, would be destined to become king. Hercules, for all his divine strength, would one day find himself forced to serve this weaker cousin. Hera had planted the seed of future humiliation before the child had even opened his eyes. If you imagine the scene, it is not the calm, glowing birth that one might expect in a bedtime tale. There was no gentle lullaby, no quiet rocking of a cradle. Instead, there was a weary mother, a confused mortal father, and an angry goddess hovering overhead, determined to twist fate into uncomfortable shapes. Hercules entered a world already tilted against him. It is worth pausing here to notice something. Myths rarely give their heroes gentle beginnings. They give them struggles, curses, and impossible circumstances. It is almost as if the story needs to prepare the ground for the hardship to come. Hercules would become the strongest man of legend, but his first test was simply existing in the shadow of Hera's wrath. His birth name was Alcides, after his grandfather. The name Hercules came later, and it was not meant as a compliment. It meant glory of Hera, a bitter little joke, because every time Hera tried to destroy him, she would only add to his glory. Imagine carrying a name that constantly reminded your greatest enemy of her failures. It is not the kind of nickname you choose for yourself. Even in these earliest moments, Hercules was not entirely ordinary. Some versions of the myth suggest that when he cried, his voice thundered like a storm. A baby's wail is normally a fragile, piercing sound. In Hercules' case, it was closer to a small earthquake. People whispered that he was marked by strength. Even as he lay swaddled in his cradle, that cradle, of course, would soon become a battlefield, because Hera was not finished with him, but that is for later. For now, he was only a baby, loud, restless, inconvenient, and destined for trouble. Alcmene, holding him in her arms, may have hoped for a normal life for her son. Mothers often hope for such things, even when they are impossible. Perhaps she imagined him growing into a man who would live quietly, far from divine grudges. But myths are not built on quiet lives. They are built on complications, on long journeys, on heroes forced into impossible tasks. And Hercules, though he did not know it yet, had been chosen for all of these. It is strange, is it not, to think that a child can be born already carrying a destiny. Before he could speak, Hercules had enemies. Before he could walk, he had obligations. Before he had a chance to choose anything at all, he had been chosen by the gods for a life of struggle. It is a reminder that myths are less about choice and more about fate. Heroes do not ask for their burdens, they are handed to them at birth. So the peculiar birth of Hercules ends not with a sense of peace, but with an air of waiting. Waiting for Hera's next move. Waiting for the first challenge. Waiting for the child to grow into the man who would one day wrestle lions, slay monsters, and carry the weight of impossible labors. But for now, in the quiet hours after his birth, Hercules was only a baby with a storm inside him, a goddess against him, and a world already whispering about what he would become. And that is how the story begins. Slowly, uneasily, with a night stretched into 3 nights, a jealous goddess bending fate, and a mother hoping for a peace that would never come. It is not a triumphant beginning, but it is a mythic one. And as you listen, you can let the slow repetition of these details settle over you. Hercules was born. Hera was angry, Alcmene was weary, Zeus was careless, and the story had only just begun. The peculiar thing about Hercules is that he did not wait until adulthood to begin showing signs of being inconvenient. Some heroes grow into their strength gradually, after years of training or long journeys. Hercules, however, began almost immediately, as if the gods had decided to make it clear from the start that he would not be ordinary. From his first weeks as a baby, there were small details too small to be called miracles, too strange to be called normal that set him apart. Babies, as you may know, are usually fragile. They cry, they wave their arms helplessly, they cling to their mothers, and they struggle even to hold their own heads up. Hercules did all of these things, but he did them with a strength that seemed entirely out of proportion. His cries, it was said, were not the thin, piercing cries of an infant, but something deeper. Something that shook the air like a miniature clap of thunder. Neighbors swore that the sound rattled the beams of the house. When he flailed his arms, he sometimes knocked over small furniture. When he gripped his mother's finger, it was with the pressure of a grown man's hand. At first, people thought these were just exaggerated stories told by proud parents. After all, new parents often exaggerate. They say their baby is clever, or strong, or unusually calm, even when the baby is really just a baby. But in this case, the stories were not exaggerations. Alcmene knew it, Amphitryon knew it, and before long, Hera also knew it. Hera, of course, had been waiting for an excuse to intervene. And when she saw that Hercules had been born with unnatural strength, she decided to test just how strong he really was. One night, while the infant Hercules lay in his cradle, Hera sent a serpent slithering into the room. These were not little snakes you might find in the grass. They were great coiling creatures, sent with one clear purpose: to strangle the baby in his sleep. Alcmene, weary from weeks of Hera's interference, was fast asleep, and Amphitryon was unaware. The snakes slid across the floor, up to the cradle, their bodies gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Most babies, if confronted with 2 snakes, would do exactly what you expect. They would scream, flail helplessly, and hope for someone else to intervene. Hercules, however, did not scream. He did not even seem frightened. Instead, the infant reached out his little hands and caught the snakes by their necks, and with a strength that no one could possibly explain, he squeezed. The snakes writhed and twisted, their coils wrapping around him, but he did not let go. He held on tighter and tighter until, within moments, both serpents were lifeless. When Alcmene awoke and rushed to the cradle, she found her baby laughing and gurgling, holding the limp bodies of 2 enormous snakes as if they were nothing more than toys. The story spread quickly. Neighbors whispered, servants carried the tale to distant towns. Some said it was a miracle, others said it was a curse. Amphitryon, deeply unsettled, began to realize that raising this child would not be the ordinary experience of teaching a boy to run, wrestle, and fish. This was a child who had killed serpents with his bare hands before learning to walk. Hera, for her part, was not pleased. She had hoped the snakes would be the end of Hercules. Instead, they had only confirmed what she already suspected, that this child was a danger to her plans. She withdrew her serpents, but not her anger. Her grudge against Hercules, once only a flicker, now burned brightly. She would wait, she would scheme, and she would interfere again and again. The snakes had failed, but Hera had time. The story of the snakes became one of the most famous tales of Hercules' childhood, and like most famous tales, it was told in many versions. Some storytellers insisted that Alcmene prayed for help, and that Zeus himself guided the child's hands. Others insisted that it was all Hercules, that the baby simply had the strength of a man even in his cradle. A few even suggested that the snakes were not Heras at all, but ordinary creatures that wandered in by chance. But really, chance does not fit well into Greek myth. There is always a god behind the curtain, tugging at the strings. The snake incident was only the beginning. As Hercules grew, his strength grew with him. He could lift objects no child should lift. He could wrestle animals and win. He could knock over doors by accident simply by leaning against them. This was not always convenient. Imagine trying to raise a child who could break his toys not by carelessness, but by holding them too tightly. Imagine a boy who could crush a loaf of bread into powder just by gripping it. Hercules was strong, but he was not gentle, and so his early years were filled with broken furniture, ruined household objects, and a constant sense of unease. People began to treat him differently. Some admired him, whispering that he was destined for greatness. Others kept their distance, afraid that he might lash out or cause harm without meaning to. Hercules himself was still a child, unaware of the weight of these expectations. He wanted only to play, to eat, to sleep, like any other boy. But even in play he left marked scars on the earth, splintered toys and bruises on playmates who learned quickly not to wrestle with him. Alcmene did what she could to give her son a normal childhood, but there is only so much a mortal mother can do when the gods are watching. She wrapped him in thicker cloths, hoping to soften his strength. She scolded him when he broke things, though he often did not understand what he had done wrong. And at night, she must have wondered how long she could protect him from the goddess who hated him. Hercules, of course, did not understand Hera's wrath. He was too young to grasp that he was the target of a divine feud. He only knew that he was restless, that people looked at him strangely, and that sometimes, in his cradle or on the ground, he had dreams filled with shadows and snakes. Those dreams would stay with him, reminding him always of how early Hera had tried to end his life. And so the years passed, slowly but heavily, like a long night stretched out too far. The baby with too much strength grew into a boy with too much strength, and everyone around him realized that nothing about his life would ever be simple. He had survived Hera's first attempt, but survival was not the same as peace. Peace for Hercules would always be a distant thing, always beyond reach. This, then, is the story of Hercules as a baby. Not a soft, gentle story filled with lullabies, but a story of serpents in the night, a cradle turned into a battlefield, and a child who gripped danger and crushed it before he could even speak. A baby with too much strength is not a comfortable presence, but it is a memorable one. And in Greek myth, memorable is always the beginning of legend, and as you lie here listening to the story drift along, you may notice that it repeats itself. Hercules was strong. He was far too strong. He was strong even as a baby. He held snakes. He crushed them. He laughed as others trembled. These details circle back again and again, because in stories told for sleep, repetition is its own kind of lullaby. The baby was strong. The baby was inconvenient. The baby was Hercules. Growing up is rarely simple for anyone. Even the most ordinary children find that the teenage years arrive with awkwardness, mistakes, and the feeling of being slightly too big for the space they occupied. For Hercules, this problem was exaggerated beyond measure. It was not simply too tall for the doorway or too heavy for the family furniture. It was too powerful for nearly every aspect of daily life, where most boys wrestled with each other for fun. Hercules wrestled with the very idea of how to live among mortals without breaking everything in sight. By the time he reached his early teens, Hercules was enormous. The Greeks loved to exaggerate, of course, but even they agreed that this boy was far larger than anyone his age should be. His shoulders were broad, his arms thick with muscle, and his appetite seemed endless. A normal boy might eat a loaf of bread in a day. Hercules could eat the bakery, and Amphitryon, his stepfather, often sighed as he tried to keep up with the boy's needs. Feeding Hercules was not an act of love, but of survival. Still, it was not only the size of his body that marked him as different, it was the clumsiness that comes with power. Teenagers are famously clumsy. They knock things over, bump into door frames, drop cups, and trip over their own feet. Hercules did all of these things, but each accident carried consequences far larger than usual. If he bumped into a door frame, the door frame splintered. If he dropped a cup, the cup shattered into dust. If he tripped, the ground cracked beneath him. Alcmene often found herself apologizing to neighbors for yet another broken fence or dented wall. Like most boys, Hercules was given lessons. The Greeks valued education highly, and even a boy marked by the gods was expected to study. He was taught reading and writing, though these did not interest him much. He was taught music, which went worse. His tutor, a man named Linus, attempted to teach him the lyre. Imagine a boy with hands large enough to break snakes trying to pluck delicate strings. It was never going to end well. Hercules tried, he really did. But his fingers pressed too hard, his patience too thin. Where music should have flowed, there was only the sound of snapped strings. Linus grew frustrated, and Hercules grew frustrated in return. One day, in a moment of anger, the young Hercules struck his teacher. The blow was meant as a warning, perhaps, or an outburst, but Hercules did not yet know how to control his strength. The strike killed Linus instantly. This was not the kind of progress anyone wanted. To kill your teacher during a music lesson is, even by mythological standards, considered bad manners. Amphitryon, horrified, sent Hercules away from formal lessons. If he could not master the lyre, perhaps he could at least master the bow, the spear, or his own fists. And so Hercules was shifted from the classroom to the training ground. He was taught archery by Eurytus, chariot driving by Amphitryon himself, and wrestling by Autolycus. In each subject he excelled, though again his excellence often caused damage to the very people teaching him. Despite these challenges, there was something endearing about Hercules as a teenager. He was not cruel by nature. He was, in many ways, gentle at heart, wishing only to please his family and to live among others without causing trouble. But his strength betrayed him. He hugged too hard, laughed too loud, and struck too fiercely. Friends avoided sparring with him. Girls looked at him with admiration and fear in equal measure. He was not just a boy, he was already something closer to a man, and the difference created distance. Yet myths are never without small bright moments. It is said that Hercules loved animals. He would spend long hours in the fields, tending sheep or watching horses. Animals did not mind his strength. They did not scold him for breaking things, nor did they shrink from his size. He could carry a lamb across his shoulders without strain, or lead an ox with a single tug, and the animals followed him as if sensing something divine. For Hercules, these moments were peace, the closest he came to feeling like an ordinary boy. But Hera had not forgotten him. She never forgot. She looked down at this awkward teenager and considered her next move. Already she had failed to kill him as a baby. Already he had proven stronger than serpents, stronger than teachers, stronger even than his own clumsy mistakes. If he continued to grow, what might he become? Hera did not like the answer. It is here, in the middle of Hercules' teenage years, that we begin to see the shadow of what was coming. His accidents, his temper, his inability to measure his own strengths, all of these would lead, in time, to a tragedy that would define him. But for now, he remained caught between boy and man, hero and nuisance, strength and awkwardness. The Greeks loved this stage of his life because it made him human. Strength without control, power without purpose, was a reminder that even heroes stumble in their youth. So, when you imagine Hercules in his teenage years, do not imagine a polished hero. Do not picture a man already dressed in lion skins, already famous across the world. Picture instead a boy too tall for his bed, too strong for his own toys, sitting in a field with animals who did not fear him, and a family who wondered what kind of man he would become. Picture a lyre lying broken, a teacher gone too soon, and a destiny still waiting in the distance. It was awkward, it was uncomfortable, and it was strangely ordinary in its own mythic way. Because awkwardness, after all, is something everyone must pass through. Hercules' teenage years simply came with more broken furniture, louder footsteps, and a heavier weight of expectation. And so, the story drifts onward. Hercules grew, he struggled, he failed at music, he succeeded at strength, he frightened his teachers and his friends. He laughed too loud, ate too much, and broke too many things. And in all of this, he was not yet a hero. He was only a teenager, awkward, inconvenient, and destined for something much greater than he could possibly imagine. By the time Hercules reached adulthood, his awkward teenage clumsiness had been replaced with sheer, undeniable strength. He had grown into his body, and the boy who once splintered door frames simply by leaning against them was now a man who could carry a bull across his shoulders or snap a bow with a flick of his wrist. People admired him, people feared him. And, in the city of Thebes, Hercules began to seem like a gifted protector whose strength could shield the community from any threat. For a while, it looked as though his life might finally turn toward peace. He married Megara, the daughter of King Creon, and together they had children. Imagine that for a moment. Hercules, the slayer of snakes, the destroyer of liars, sitting quietly at home, holding a baby on his massive knee. There must have been something touching about it, the contrast between his bulk and their smallness. Neighbors would have whispered that perhaps the boy had finally grown into a man of balance. Perhaps even Hera had given up her anger. But no, Hera had not forgotten. She never forgot, she only waited. Hera decided that if she could not kill Hercules outright, she could at least break him, and so she sent madness upon him. This was not the kind of madness that comes slowly, from years of worry or stress. This was sudden, divine madness, a clouding of the mind that turned day into nightmare. One moment, Hercules looked upon his wife and children with love. The next, he no longer recognized them. In the fog of Hera's curse, he saw enemies, threats, monsters to be destroyed. What followed was the darkest moment of his life. Hercules, in his madness, killed his own children and his beloved Megara. The details vary from one telling to another, as myths often do, but the core remains the same. He struck down those he loved most, unaware of what he was doing, blind to the truth until it was too late. When the madness lifted, when his mind cleared, he saw the destruction around him, and his heart broke. This, the strongest man alive, was powerless against his own grief. It is important to pause here. Greek myths are full of monsters and battles, of swords flashing and heroes triumphing, but they are also full of sorrow. For Hercules, this was the first and greatest sorrow. No Hydra, no lion, no war could compare to the weight of realizing what he had done. He had defeated snakes in his cradle, but he could not defeat the hand of Hera pressing madness into his mind. His strength, which had always been his greatest gift, had become his greatest curse. So Hercules did what many Greeks in despair did. He sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi. The oracle was a priestess who spoke with the voice of Apollo, giving answers that were often mysterious, sometimes frustrating, and always treated as divine truth. Hercules traveled to her, heavy with guilt, hoping for a way to cleanse himself. He did not ask to be excused. He did not ask for forgiveness. He only asked what he must do to live with what had happened. The oracle listened, or perhaps she listened to Apollo speaking through her, and she gave her answer. Hercules, she said, must serve King Eurystheus of Tyrants for a period of 12 years. It was Eurystheus, remember, who had been born prematurely because of Hera's schemes, and who therefore held the title of king that might otherwise have been Hercules' own. To serve him would not only be humiliating, it would be infuriating, and yet this was the path laid out. Hercules would purify himself not with prayers, but with deeds, 12 impossible tasks that only he could complete. The oracle's words settled over him like a heavy cloak. To serve Eurystheus, a man weaker in body and smaller in spirit, was an insult, but Hercules accepted it. He had no choice. If he was to live, he must atone. And if atonement required humiliation, then humiliation he would endure. The people around him whispered, of course. Some pitied him, some judged him, some said that his madness excused him, while others argued that even divine madness could not absolve him of such deeds. Scholars have debated this point for centuries. Was Hercules guilty, or was he a victim? The Greeks, who loved contradictions, would have said both. He was guilty because he killed his family, and he was a victim because the gods forced his hand. Both truths sat together, uncomfortable and unresolved. For Hercules, there was no comfort in debate. He could not undo what was done. He could only move forward, step by step, into a future that promised neither peace nor rest. The oracle had spoken, and the oracle was never wrong. 12 labors awaited him, 12 trials that would test not only his strength, but his will, his patience, and his humanity. And so, the strongest man alive, the baby who crushed serpents, the teenager who killed a teacher, the husband who lost his family, found himself kneeling before the decree of a god. He was no longer just Hercules, the strong. He was Hercules the guilty, Hercules the servant, Hercules the penitent. It is here, in this moment of despair, that the myth takes its sharpest turn. From birth, his story had been peculiar, inconvenient, even violent, but now it became something else. A story of punishment, of atonement, and of a hero who did not choose his path but walked it anyway. The madness was behind him, but its shadow would follow him forever. Every labor, every victory, every song sung about his name would carry the weight of that loss. And as you drift deeper into this story, you might feel how heavy it becomes. The pace slows, the words repeat themselves, circling back again and again to that single fact. Hercules killed his family. He did it in madness, but he did it. He sought the oracle. He was told to serve Eurystheus. He accepted. These details loop like the tolling of a bell, soft but insistent, a rhythm meant to settle you into the inevitability of myth. Hercules was guilty. Hercules was punished. Hercules would atone. When Eurystheus, the small and nervous king, heard that Hercules had been ordered to serve him, he must have smiled in the way that only a petty man can smile. Imagine the satisfaction. The strongest man alive, a son of Zeus, now reduced to taking orders from someone who could barely lift his own sword. Eurystheus wasted no time in setting Hercules a task that was meant to be impossible. The first labor, he declared, was to slay the Nemean Lion. Now, lions in Greek stories were never ordinary. They were never the kind you see dozing in the sun at a zoo, swishing their tails lazily. No, mythical lions were something else entirely. The Nemean Lion was said to be the child of monsters, a beast so massive and ferocious that its golden hide could not be pierced by sword, spear, or arrow. Its roar echoed across the hills of Nemea, terrifying farmers and scattering flocks. It prowled the countryside, dragging off sheep, cattle, and sometimes shepherds themselves. It was not just an animal, it was a curse. Hercules, however, did not hesitate. He set out with his club and his bow, the simple weapons he trusted most. His bow had brought down many animals before, and his club was the kind of tool that only Hercules could wield, more like a tree trunk than a weapon, heavy enough that ordinary men could not even lift it. With these, he made his way into the hills of Nemea, following the trail of ruined fields and frightened villagers, until he came to the cave where the lion was said to live. At first, Hercules tried the obvious approach. He drew his bow, fitted an arrow, and fired it straight into the lion's side. The arrow bounced off. He tried again, striking the beast in the chest. Again, the arrow fell uselessly to the ground. The lion roared, a sound so loud it seemed to shake the earth, and Hercules realized that no weapon would pierce that hide. He had faced enemies before, but never one so impervious to blades. The lion, in a way, was like Hercules himself, untouchable, too strong for ordinary methods. So Hercules did what he often did when logic failed. He used his hands. He pursued the lion into its cave, blocking one entrance so that the beast could not escape, and then he went in after it. Imagine the scene, a pitch-black cave, the echo of claws scraping against stone, the glint of golden fur in the dim light. The lion lunged, its jaws snapping, and Hercules met it head. The fight was brutal. The lion's claws raked across Hercules' skin, but his body withstood them. Its teeth sank into his arm, but he endured. He grappled with it, wrapping his enormous arms around its neck, holding it in a grip that no creature could break. Slowly, with the strength that had once crushed serpents in his cradle, he strangled the lion. Its roars echoed and then faded, until the cave grew silent. When he emerged, Hercules carried the dead lion across his shoulders. The people of Nemea must have stared in awe. Here was the man who had killed the unkillable, who had subdued a monster with nothing but his bare hands. Yet Hercules did not stop there. He tried to skin the lion, hoping to keep its golden hide as proof of his victory, but no knife could cut it. Frustrated, he finally discovered that the lion's own claws could cut its hide. With them, he skinned the beast and wore its pelt as a cloak, the head forming a hood that turned him into something more than human, half man, half lion, a creature of myth wrapped in the skin of another myth. This, of course, became Hercules' most famous image. From that day onward, people rarely pictured him without the lion's skin draped over his shoulders. It was not only protection, though, it made him nearly invulnerable. It was also a symbol. To wear the skin of the Nemean Lion was to announce that he had faced the impossible and won. When Hercules returned to Eurystheus with the lion's hide, the little king was horrified. He had not expected Hercules to succeed. He had imagined, perhaps, that the lion would finally rid him of this troublesome servant. Instead, here was Hercules, alive, triumphant, and stronger than ever, wrapped in the pelt of the beast that had terrorized the countryside. Eurystheus was so frightened that he refused to allow Hercules into the city. From that point on, Hercules was ordered to deliver proof of his labors outside the gates, where Eurystheus could remain safely behind walls and watch from a distance. The scholars, of course, argue about the meaning of this labor. Some say the lion was a symbol of raw nature, and that Hercules' victory represented the triumph of civilization over chaos. Others suggest it was a metaphor for Hercules himself, a man who could not be pierced by ordinary rules, only subdued by the gods. And still others insist it was simply a story meant to explain why Hercules was always pictured with that famous lion-skin cloak. But debates aside, the story has always lingered, because it is so simple, so striking. A man fights a lion with his bare hands and wins, and so the first labor was completed. Hercules had begun his long road of atonement with a victory that was both brutal and iconic. He had not yet faced the Hydra, the stables, the mares, or any of the other impossible tasks, but he had proven that he could do what no one else could. The strongest man alive had strangled the strongest beast alive, and the story would be told for generations. As you listen, the details repeat themselves, circling like a lullaby. The lion's hide could not be pierced. The arrows fell uselessly. Hercules used his hands. He strangled the beast. He wore its skin. Again and again, the story returns to these points, softening them until they blur into rhythm. The lion was unkillable. Hercules killed it. The lion's hide was impenetrable. Hercules wore it. These words settle like the slow beating of a drum, pulling you deeper into the calm of the story. If the Nemean lion was a test of brute strength, then the second labor was a test of something far more complicated. Eurystheus, who still hoped Hercules would be destroyed, sent him to face the Hydra of Lerna. Now, the Hydra was no ordinary serpent. Ordinary serpents hiss, slither, and occasionally bite. This serpent had many heads, 9, 10, perhaps more, depending on who told the story. But the truly inconvenient part was not its number of heads. It was the fact that if one head was cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. The Hydra lived in the swamp near the lake of Lerna, a dark and foul place where the air itself seemed heavy and damp. Locals avoided it, for they knew the ground was treacherous and the beast was near. The Hydra, with its many snapping jaws, terrorized the countryside, killing cattle and frightening travelers. The people of Lerna must have prayed every night that someone would rid them of this horror. And when Hercules arrived, wearing the lion's skin from his first labor, they must have thought perhaps, just perhaps, this man can do it. Hercules did not go alone this time. He brought with him his nephew, Iolaus, a loyal companion. Some say he needed help because he knew this labor was beyond strength alone. Others suggest that Hercules simply enjoyed company, and having a nephew nearby to hand him a torch or a club was convenient. Either way, the two set off for the swamp, armed with sword, bow, and fire. At first, Hercules tried the direct approach. He shot arrows into the swamp, hoping to draw the beast out. The Hydra slithered forth, a terrible sight, its many heads weaving and hissing, its body vast and coiled, its breath poisonous enough to wither plants. Hercules charged. He swung his sword, slicing off a head with ease. But no sooner had it fallen than 2 more sprouted from the wound, each snapping with fresh hunger. This was going to be a problem. Hercules hacked again, and again the heads multiplied. The more he struck, the worse it became. Imagine trying to sweep water off the floor while a pipe bursts behind you. That was the essence of the Hydra, for it only created more trouble. Soon he was surrounded by heads, each lunging and striking, the sound of hissing filling the swamp like a chorus of angry kettles. Here is where Iolaus proved his worth. He had the clever idea of using fire. When Hercules cut off a head, Iolaus pressed a burning torch to the stump, searing it closed before new heads could grow. Slowly, the impossible task became manageable. One by one, the heads fell, and one by one, the flames prevented them from returning. Hercules held the beast in check, and Iolaus sealed the wounds. Together, they turned chaos into victory. But the Hydra had one more trick. Among its many heads, one was said to be immortal. No flame could burn it, no blade could destroy it. Hercules cut it off anyway, placed it beneath a heavy rock, and left it buried in the earth. There it would remain, silent and useless, pinned beneath stone, but never truly dead. When the battle was done, Hercules dipped his arrows into the Hydra's blood, which was so poisonous that even a scratch could kill. This perhaps was not in the spirit of the labor, but Hercules was nothing if not practical. If a weapon could be made more deadly, why not? From that day forward, his arrows carried the lethal sting of Hydra's venom, a gift or curse that would play a role in later tragedies. When Hercules returned to Eurystheus with news of his victory, the king frowned. He declared that because Hercules had accepted help from Iolaus, the labor should not count. Imagine that. Slaying an immortal-headed, poison-breathing, regenerating monster, and your boss tells you it doesn't count because your nephew held the torch. Such was the pettiness of Eurystheus, but the oracle had said 12 labors, and so Hercules would have 12 more chances. Scholars again debate the meaning of this tale. Some say the Hydra represented the many problems of human life that for every one we solve, more appear. Others suggest it was a symbol of the swamp itself, the dangers of nature that multiply if left unchecked. Still others view it as a warning about anger. Cut it down once, and it returns doubled. Whatever the case, the story endures because of its strange rhythm. Cut one head, two more appear. Cut one head, two more appear. Fire solves what the sword cannot. Together, strength and cleverness win, and in the slow retelling, the details become like waves. Hercules cuts, the heads return. Iolaus burns, the heads stop. Hercules cuts again. Iolaus burns again, over and over until the monster falls. The cycle repeats itself like a chant, soothing in its inevitability. No matter how many heads appeared, in the end, the Hydra was defeated, so the second labor came to a close. Hercules did not triumph alone, but he triumphed nonetheless. He walked away not only with victory, but with poisoned arrows that would change the course of his story. And though Eurystheus tried to deny him the credit, the people knew the truth. The swamp was safe again, the Hydra was gone, and Hercules had proven that he could defeat even the enemy that multiplied with every strike. If the first two labors had been tests of violence, one demanding strangling a lion with bare hands, the other requiring fire to stop a serpent's endless heads, then the third was something entirely different. Eurystheus, perhaps running out of ways to imagine Hercules' death, decided this time not on a beast that killed men, but on an animal so swift and sacred that catching it would be nearly impossible. The task was to capture the Ceryneian hind, a golden-horned deer belonging to Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Now, this hind was no ordinary deer. Ordinary deer run fast, leap gracefully, and, if you've ever watched one long enough, tend to look permanently startled. But the Ceryneian hind was swifter than the wind, with hooves of bronze and antlers of gold that caught the sunlight as it moved. It was said to roam the forests of Arcadia, darting between trees so quickly that even arrows could not catch it. To make matters worse, the hind was beloved by Artemis, and to harm it would bring the wrath of the goddess herself. So Hercules had to capture it alive, unharmed and unbroken. The instructions were simple, but simplicity is deceptive. To capture a creature that outruns the wind is a task designed for futility. Yet Hercules, wearing the lion's skin and carrying his bow, set out into the wilderness. For days he tracked the hind. He followed hoofprints across rivers, through mountains, and into valleys. He saw glimpses of golden horns flashing between trees, only to lose them again in the shadows. The chase went on not for days, nor weeks, but nearly a year. Imagine that. The strongest man alive, spending 12 months running after a deer. It was absurd, and yet it was the labor set before him. During that year, Hercules must have learned patience. He was used to solving problems with force strike, break, crush, and the problem goes away. But the hind could not be crushed. It could only be pursued. Day after day, Hercules chased it, growing weary but never giving up. Some versions say that he finally caught it when it paused to drink from a river. His arrow loosed so carefully that it pierced the space between tendon and bone, wounding but not killing. Others claim he simply tackled it at last, his strength outweighing its speed. However it happened, the important part was that the hind was alive, subdued, and unharmed. When Hercules carried the animal away, he encountered Artemis herself, and here the story becomes delicate. Artemis was not known for her patience. She was the goddess who once turned Actaeon into a stag simply for glimpsing her while she bathed, and then let his own hounds tear him apart. If she was angered at Hercules for laying hands on her sacred hind, his strength would mean nothing. And yet, somehow, he convinced her. He explained that this was no act of his own will, but a command laid upon him by Eurystheus and the oracle. Perhaps Artemis respected his honesty. Perhaps she saw that the hind was unharmed. Perhaps, though the myths do not say it outright, she even admired the patience it had taken. In the end, she allowed him to carry the hind to Eurystheus with one condition, that he release it afterward. So Hercules, heavy with both animal and responsibility, brought it back to the little king, who no doubt gaped at the golden antlers with wide eyes. Proof of the labor was there, shimmering and alive. But before Eurystheus could claim the animal for himself, Hercules released it, letting it bound back into the forests, golden horns vanishing into the trees once again. This labor is often seen as symbolic. Some scholars argue it represents restraint, that not every challenge in life should be met with violence. Others see it as the hero's first lesson in humility, learning that brute force alone cannot solve all things. And still others suggest it was simply a story to explain why Hercules was pictured not only as strong but also as clever and patient. After all, to chase a deer for a year requires not only stamina but also a certain stubborn calm. As you listen, the repetition of the chase becomes almost lulling. Day after day, hoofprints in the dirt. Day after day, horns flashing in the distance. Day after day, Hercules running, stumbling, following, refusing to stop. The cycle stretches across the seasons, the hind in spring among blossoms, the hind in summer beneath the sun, the hind in autumn leaping through fallen leaves, the hind in winter, breath steaming in the cold. Over and over, the image repeats until it settles in your mind like the ticking of a clock. And so, the third labor ended not with the cracking of bones or the spilling of blood, but with a creature set free. Hercules proved that he could not only strangle lions and burn serpents, but also show patience enough to capture and release a goddess's sacred animal. It was, in its quiet way, one of his most impressive victories. If chasing the golden hind had been a lesson in patience, then the next labor seemed designed as the oppositor returned to brute force. But with a touch of winter misery, Eurystheus, still scheming from his palace, ordered Hercules to capture the Erymanthian boar. And this was not just any boar. Ordinary boars are already troublesome creatures, charging through fields, overturning fences, and leaving farmers in despair. But the Erymanthian boar was monstrous, a beast that thundered across the snowy slopes of Mount Erymanthus, scattering men and beasts alike. It is said that the ground shook when the boar ran, that its tusks gleamed like polished ivory, and that its fury could topple trees. For the people living near the mountain, the sound of it crashing through the forest must have been enough to keep them indoors. This was no gentle deer. This was a roaring, snorting avalanche of muscle, hide, and rage. And Eurystheus, who never risked setting foot outside his palace, told Hercules to bring it back alive. So Hercules set out once more, trudging into the mountains. The air grew colder, the paths steeper, and the snow thicker. Unlike the hind, the boar did not dart away gracefully. It barreled forward like a boulder loosed from a cliff. To catch it meant to outlast it, to corner it, to use the terrain itself. Hercules tracked it through forests where trees splintered from its charge, and across valleys where its tusks gouged the earth. Each footprint it left behind was like a crater, proof of the raw power Hercules was meant to overcome. Along the way, the stories tell of an interruption. Hercules, passing near the land of a centaur named Pholus, stopped for shelter. Now, centaurs were not known for their hospitality, but Pholus was different, gentler, more civilized. He offered Hercules food and conversation, and, as the myths often remind us, wine. This wine, however, was not ordinary. It belonged to all the centaurs, stored in a great jar for communal use. When Hercules uncorked it, the smell drifted across the hills, and soon every centaur for miles came charging, enraged that their shared vintage had been disturbed. The result was chaos. Hercules fought them off with arrows dipped in Hydra's venom, and the centaurs fell. But in the confusion, Pholus accidentally wounded himself with one of the poison shafts and died. This grim turn of events served as a reminder Hercules' labors might seem straightforward, but his path was always shadowed by tragedy. Still, with the centaurs scattered and sorrow heavy on his shoulders, he continued on to face the boar. At last he found it. The Erymanthian boar thundered down the mountainside, tusks gleaming, snow spraying in its wake. Hercules gave chase, driving it higher and higher, until the beast, exhausted, found itself mired in deep snow. There, where its great weight became its own prison, Hercules sprang upon it. He bound it with chains, wrapping it in iron and strength, and the monster was subdued. Imagine the scene: the strongest man alive trudging down the mountainside, dragging behind him a roaring, snorting, thrashing boar the size of a house. Villagers must have peeked from their doors, wide-eyed, as the earth itself seemed to shake with the beast's fury. Yet Hercules pulled it along as if it were nothing more than a stubborn mule. When he brought the boar to Eurystheus, the little king once again panicked. Seeing Hercules alive was bad enough. Seeing Hercules alive and dragging a mountain-sized pig was worse. Terrified, Eurystheus is said to have leapt into a great bronze jar, hiding inside until Hercules and his prize were gone. It became a running pattern, Hercules performing the impossible, and Eurystheus finding ever more ridiculous ways to express his fear. Scholars, of course, try to read deeper meaning. Some say the boar represented the untamed wilds of the mountain, the fury of nature harnessed by human will. Others argue that it was symbolic of Hercules' ability to control his own rage, to capture rather than destroy. Still others dismiss it as a story told for laughter. The image of a mighty hero dragging a giant pig while his king hides in a pot is almost comedic. But the story, repeated slowly, takes on its own rhythm. The boar runs, the ground shakes, the snow flies. Hercules chases, the boar slows. The snow deepens, Hercules seizes. The chains bind, again and again. The cycle turns, until the outcome becomes inevitable. The monster, no matter how fierce, is dragged away, snorting, helpless. And so, the fourth labor ended. Hercules had proven once again that strength, patience, and a little stubborn determination could master even the wildest of creatures. The people were safe, the mountain was quiet, and Eurystheus, though he refused to admit it, was running out of ways to hope for Hercules' death. After lions, serpents, deer and boars, you might think Eurystheus would run out of ideas. But the king had a peculiar imagination, and for Hercules' next labor, he devised something that at first seemed far less dangerous. No claws, no fangs, no charging tusks, just filth. The Augean stables. King Augeas of Elis was famous for his herds of cattle, thousands upon thousands of animals, more than any man could possibly count. They were strong, beautiful beasts, but they had one thing in common. They produced manure, an endless amount of it. The stables where they were housed had not been cleaned in 30 years. Imagine the smell, imagine the flies, imagine mountains of dung piled higher than a man. For the people of Elis, it was not a matter of heroics, it was simply unbearable. And so Eurystheus ordered Hercules to clean the Augean stables in a single day. At first glance, it sounded insulting, almost beneath him. Here was a man who had slain monsters, chased sacred deer, and dragged boars through the snow, now being told to take up a shovel. Hercules, however, was no fool. He recognized the trick. To clean by hand would be impossible. Even with his great strength, shoveling 30 years of filth would take weeks, perhaps months. But Hercules was not only strong, he was clever. He struck a bargain with Augeas himself. If he could clean the stables in one day, the king would grant him a share of the cattle. Augeas agreed, perhaps laughing at the absurdity. But Hercules, instead of picking up a shovel, studied the land. He saw where two great rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, flowed nearby, and he conceived an idea that was less heroic and more hydraulic. With picks and tools, Hercules diverted the courses of the rivers. He broke through embankments, dug channels, and guided the rushing waters straight into the stables. The torrent swept through like a flood, carrying with it years of filth. The dung, the straw, the muck, all of it washed away in a single roaring surge. The stables, once mountains of filth, stood clean for the first time in generations. It was, perhaps, the most practical of all Hercules' labors. No bloodshed, no monsters, just a clever solution to a very human problem. Yet, as with everything in Hercules' life, it did not end simply. Augeas, realizing that he would have to part with his cattle, refused to honor the bargain. He claimed that Hercules had cheated, that diverting rivers was not the same as cleaning. Later, in some versions, Hercules returned to punish him for this betrayal, but for the moment, the labor was declared complete, though Eurystheus ever jealous decided that because Hercules had sought payment, this task too would not count. The scholars who study such tales find endless meaning in this one. Some say it represents the cleansing of corruption, the washing away of filth from society by a flood of justice. Others suggest it is a lesson in ingenuity, that strength alone is nothing without intelligence, and still others laugh at the sheer absurdity of it. A mighty hero becoming history's first plumber, redirecting rivers not to defeat a monster but to scrub out cattle stalls. The rhythm of the story itself has a lulling quality. First the filth, piled higher and higher, then the rivers, rushing, cleansing, roaring, over and over. The water surges through, sweeping away what had been there for decades. The sound of water washing, the thought of filth dissolving, becomes almost hypnotic. Not claws or roars this time, but the steady flow of water doing what no man's hands could. And yet, when Hercules presented the clean stables, Eurystheus frowned again. One more labor dismissed, one more attempt to belittle the hero, but the people of Elis, breathing fresh air at last, surely knew better. The stables were clean. The impossible had been done. Whether or not Eurystheus counted it, Hercules had turned mountains of filth into nothing but memory, and he had done it with wit as much as muscle. So ended the labor of the Augean stables, not with blood, not with violence, but with rivers running through a place that had been neglected for too long. It was proof that Hercules' greatness lay not only in breaking monsters, but in solving problems, however unpleasant they might be. If the Augean stables had been unpleasant in smell, the next labor was unpleasant in sound. For Eurystheus sent Hercules to the marshes of Lake Stymphalus, where a great flock of birds had made their home. But these were no ordinary birds. They were the Stymphalian birds, creatures sacred to Ares, the god of war. And like many things sacred to war, they were dangerous in the most inconvenient ways. The birds had bronze beaks sharp enough to pierce armor. Their feathers were like metal darts, which they could launch in showers upon anyone who came near. Their wings beat with a sound so harsh and rattling that it seemed like thunder tearing through the sky. For the villagers around the lake, they were more than a nuisance. They stripped crops, devoured seeds, and attacked humans and livestock alike. To live near the marsh was to live in constant fear of being shredded from above, so Hercules journeyed to the swampy lands, where reeds bent beneath the wind and the water lay still and dark. The marsh was a miserable place, damp and thick with fog, the kind of place where sound carried strangely and shadows seemed to move on their own. He could hear the birds before he saw them, a cacophony of screeches and the metallic rattle of wings. It was not a welcoming song, but a promise of violence. Hercules, for once, faced a problem his club and bow could not easily solve. The marshland was too soft to charge upon, too treacherous to move quickly through. If he tried to fire arrows, the birds would scatter, then return in deadly swarms. And if he tried to wade in directly, he would be overwhelmed by a storm of feathers and claws. He needed a different strategy. It was then, the stories tell us, that Athena herself lent him aid. She gave him a pair of bronze clappers, crafted by Hephaestus, the god of the forge. These were not weapons in the ordinary sense, but tools of sound. When struck together, they rang out with such a harsh, piercing clamor that no creature could endure it. Armed with these, Hercules stood at the edge of the swamp and struck them loudly. The noise was terrible, ringing across the marshes, echoing between trees and reeds. The Stymphalian birds, startled and panicked, rose into the air in great flocks, their wings beating frantically. No longer sheltered by the swamp, they became targets. Hercules fitted arrows to his bow, and one by one, he shot them down as they fled. Some were killed, their bronze feathers clattering as they fell. Others escaped, flying far across the sea, never to trouble Greece again. The marsh grew quiet. The reeds bent only with the wind now, and the air no longer shook with the metallic din of wings. The people near Stymphalus, freed from the terror of the birds, could return to their lives. Crops would grow again, livestock would be safe, and the strange storm of bronze feathers was only a memory. Eurystheus, of course, had little gratitude. He wanted Hercules dead, not triumphant, but the labor was done. Another impossible task, another victory claimed. As always, scholars look for meaning. Some say the birds were a symbol of pestilence, their feathers representing disease that rained down on villagers. Others see them as metaphors for raiders, small but deadly forces swooping in to strip a land bare. Still others read the tale simply as a reminder that sometimes noise itself can be a weapon, that cleverness and borrowed tools may succeed where brute strength cannot. For the listener, though, the story slows into a rhythm. First the marsh, quiet, still, fog thick in the air. Then the sudden rattle, the screeching, the endless din of wings, and then, with the clashing of bronze, silence once more. It is almost like breathing, the noise rising, the noise falling, the air returning calm. A cycle repeated, until the tale itself grows drowsy, and you can almost imagine the reeds swaying gently under a sky now emptied of wings. And so, the labor of the Stymphalian birds ended not with a monstrous roar, but with a fading echo, and the hero standing calm on the banks of a quiet swamp. After the exhausting labors of the Stymphalian birds, Hercules found himself sent far from the familiar hills of Greece to the island of Crete, a place of sun-drenched cliffs, winding paths, and the distant sound of waves crashing against rocky shores. The task was deceptively simple in description but monumental in execution. Capture the Cretan bull. It was said to be a creature of extraordinary size and power, one that had been gifted or perhaps cursed by the gods themselves. Some stories called it the bull that had carried Europa across the sea, while others suggested it was the father of the Minotaur. Whatever its origins, it was untamable by ordinary men, capable of destroying fields, frightening livestock, and leveling anything in its path. Eurystheus, sitting safely in his palace far away, demanded that Hercules bring the beast alive. Hercules arrived on Crete to find the bull roaming freely across the hills, its black coat gleaming in the sunlight. Its muscles rippled beneath its skin with each step, its nostrils flaring with fury, and its eyes burning with the calm yet terrifying intelligence of a creature that knew its own power. The air itself seemed to tremble as the bull stomped, its hooves cracking stones and flattening grass, while birds and smaller animals scattered in fear. Unlike the fleet, deer or the winged Stymphalian creatures he had faced before, this bull did not flee gracefully or scatter upon sight. It charged when threatened and simply tore through obstacles in its way. Hercules, undaunted, approached slowly, studying its movements. Every instinct he had honed in prior labors told him that this would require more than raw strength. Brute force alone could not subdue a creature of this magnitude without putting himself at grave risk. He positioned himself near a narrow pass where the bull's charges could be somewhat contained. The ground was uneven, littered with stones, and the heat of the midday sun bore down, but Hercules focused on the rhythm of the bullet's breathing, its hooves striking the earth, the flare of its tail as it swung to strike at imaginary threats. The first attempt was terrifying. The bull, sensing intrusion, lunged with surprising speed. Hercules leaped aside, grabbing the horns as he twisted to redirect its momentum. The muscles in his arms bulged as he pushed against the tremendous force of the animal. Step by step, he He forced it away from open ground and toward a narrow enclosure where its movements would be restricted. The struggle seemed endless. The bull's strength against Hercules' experience, its fury against his patience. At one point, the beast tossed him to the side, and he landed heavily on the sun-warmed stone, only to rise immediately, brushing dust from his cloak and meeting the bull's gaze without hesitation. For hours, the contest continued, a slow, almost hypnotic struggle of power and will. The bull's hooves struck sparks from stones, its breath came in loud snorts that mingled with the distant cries of frightened villagers. Hercules held the horns, steering, twisting, leveraging every ounce of strength he possessed. He used the terrain to his advantage, pushing the bull toward slopes where its own weight slowed it, forcing it to stumble slightly, and allowing him to maintain control without overexertion. Each movement required precision, timing, and a careful calculation of when to yield and when to resist. The villagers of Crete, who had long suffered from the bull's rampages, watched from a safe distance. Some hid behind walls and trees, peeking nervously, while others followed at a cautious distance, curious and fearful. No one dared approach too closely, for they knew the stories of Hercules' previous labors and of the strength of the creature before him. Yet, even from afar, the spectacle inspired awe. Here was a man, alone, confronting an untamable force of nature, grappling with it in a dance of endurance, determination, and patience. Hercules' strategy was not just about overpowering the bull. He employed a subtle understanding of the animal's behavior, noticing the slight tilt of its head before a charge, the flare of its nostrils, the twitch of its tail. Timing was everything. One misstep could result in disaster. Slowly he guided the bull toward a secluded cove near the shore, a natural pen formed by rocks and cliffs. By narrowing the space, he limited the bull's ability to spin and charge freely, making it easier to control without injury to himself or the surrounding land. At one point, the bull attempted a last, desperate charge, breaking small rocks and snapping branches as it surged forward. Hercules, anticipating the move, sidestepped, grabbed its horns, and used the momentum to pivot it sideways, finally bringing the animal to its knees. He pressed down, leveraging the ground, holding firm, until the massive creature could resist no longer. Exhausted and subdued, the bull finally calmed, snorting deeply but no longer attempting to charge. Hercules had accomplished the impossible. He had captured the untamable Cretan bull alive. With careful steps, he led the bull down the paths toward the waiting ships that would carry it back to Eurystheus. Along the way, he ensured that it did not panic, using gentle but firm pressure, murmuring softly, guiding its massive body with patience honed through years of struggle. Even the villagers, watching from a distance, could not help but marvel at the sight. A single man leading a creature that had terrorized them for years, each step a testament to the combination of strength, wisdom, and courage that defined Hercules. Upon returning to Eurystheus, the king reacted predictably. As always, he was terrified. The sheer size of the bull, combined with its raw power and the knowledge that it had been subdued by Hercules' hands, caused him to shrink back in fear. Some versions say he hid in a bronze jar, a familiar display of cowardice when confronted with Hercules' accomplishments. Others simply fled the palace. The bull, alive and unharmed, was delivered, but Eurystheus refused to claim it, fearing its destructive potential. He eventually released it, allowing it to wander freely, where it later caused trouble in the lands of Marathon until subdued by Theseus, another Greek hero. Scholars often examine this labor for its symbolism. The bull represents untamed nature, the raw force of the world that resists control, and the dangers inherent in confronting the unknown. Hercules' capture of the bull demonstrates the importance of patience, strategy, and intelligence alongside brute strength. Some say it reflects human mastery over chaos, while others focus on the hero's ability to understand his adversary and work with its nature rather than against it entirely. For listeners, the rhythm of the labor, the charge, the struggle, the eventual comp creates a slow, hypnotic cadence, much like the ebb and flow of a storm that finally passes, leaving silence in its wake. By the end of the day, the labor was complete. The Cretan bull, a creature that had struck terror across an island, had been brought under control without destruction. Hercules stood victorious, muscles still straining from hours of battle, but his mind clear and focused. The path he had taken, the careful negotiation of strength and skill, left a lasting impression on all who would hear the story. It was a tale not just of brute power, but of endurance, patience, and the subtle art of conquering forces far greater than oneself. In this way, the labor of the Cretan bull became one of the most celebrated of Hercules' adventures. It reminded listeners that even when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges, courage combined with wisdom could achieve the impossible. The tale's slow, deliberate rhythm, the vivid imagery of a massive bull and a determined hero, and the quiet satisfaction of success all combined to make it a story ideally suited for long, drowsy nights, drawing the listener into the slow unfolding of heroic mastery. After the exhausting conquest of the Cretan bull, Hercules' journey carried him to Thrace, a land of dense forests, rolling plains, and rugged mountains. where a new challenge awaited him, one more terrifying in a different way than any he had faced before. Here, King Diomedes, a man crueler than most, kept a stable of horses unlike any seen anywhere else in the world. These were the mares of Diomedes, creatures whose very presence inspired horror. They were not gentle, grazing animals meant for chariots or war. No, these mares were savage, fierce, and man-eating, trained on a diet of human flesh by the very hand of their master. Their eyes glowed red with hunger, their teeth were sharp and unforgiving, and their manes shimmered like fire when they thrashed in rage. To approach them was to invite death itself. Hercules arrived at the stables and surveyed the beasts. They snorted clouds of steam from their nostrils, paws striking the earth so forcefully that stones leapt into the air. Each step carried the weight of anticipation, and their hunger seemed palpable, as if the very air vibrated with their desire. From a distance, the villagers and travelers who had heard of these monstrous horses watched with terror. The mares were not simply animals, they were living weapons, instruments of Diomedes' cruelty. And Hercules, as always, was expected not only to survive their wrath, but to bring them under his control. The task required more than brute strength. It demanded cunning. Hercules knew that charging headlong would be suicidal. These were not ordinary horses. They had been raised on the fear and flesh of humans. Their reflexes were quick, their temper uncontrollable, and their speed unmatched. Step by step, Hercules approached, careful to avoid their snapping jaws. He studied their behavior, noticing the slight twitch of a nostril, the shifting of weight from one leg to another, the subtle flaring of red eyes when anger arose. Patience and observation would be just as important as strength on this day. He began to corral the mares slowly, moving them toward an open area where their movements could be monitored and controlled. Each time they lunged or attempted to bite, Hercules countered with precise force, redirecting their motion rather than confronting it head-on. The ground trembled beneath the stamp of their hooves, the air filled with the smell of fear and sweat, and the cries of enraged horses echoed like thunder through the stables. Yet Hercules remained calm, a steady presence amid chaos, using the skill he had honed in prior labors. First the lion, then the boar, each conquest teaching him the rhythm of beasts and the ways of taming fury. Even as he guided the mares, Diomedes attempted to intervene. The cruel king raised his spear, shouted commands, and tried to frighten Hercules into releasing his grip. But Hercules, whose resolve was as ironclad as his muscles, met the king's fury with unwavering determination. Step by step, he neutralized the king's attempts, securing the mares one by one, each horse subdued by a careful mixture of strength and strategy. The clash of wills between man and beast, and between man and man, created a tension almost unbearable to witness. For the villagers who watched, it was a lesson in courage and the terrifying power of one man who would not yield. As the struggle continued, Hercules realized that the mares' hunger, their unnatural craving for human flesh, was the key to controlling them. In some versions, he fed them a part of Diomedes himself, exacting a grim justice upon the tyrant who had starved and terrified his own lands. In other versions, simply the presence and authority of Hercules were enough to calm the frenzy. Slowly, the red glow of their eyes dimmed, the snorting became less frantic, and the wild thrashing of their legs grew under the hero's firm guidance. It was not quick work. Hours passed, the sun arced across the sky, and Hercules remained vigilant, muscles straining, mind alert, until the beasts were finally subdued. Leading the mares away was another challenge entirely. They were still powerful, still capable of destruction, and still brimming with the instincts of hunters. Hercules guided them carefully, walking alongside them, calming them, anticipating every sudden movement, avoiding sharp rocks and low branches. Step by step, the herd moved across the plains, over rivers and hills, each hoofall a reminder of their strength and danger. Hercules' endurance, both physical and mental, was tested as much in guiding the mares as in subduing them. He could not rest, could not let his attention waver for a moment, for one lapse could mean disaster for both himself and the surrounding countryside. The journey back to Eurystheus' city was long. Along the way, Hercules maintained control of the herd, using subtle gestures, whispered commands, and steady presence. Villagers and travelers could only gape as they witnessed a single man walking calmly beside a dozen savage man-eating horses, their heads high, their hooves striking the earth with measured rhythm. No one dared approach, yet everyone marveled, for the sight was as much a spectacle of mastery as it was a warning. Power tamed by wisdom is the greatest strength of all. Finally, Hercules delivered the mares to Eurystheus, and, as was often the case, the king recoiled in fear. Terrified of the beasts he had demanded, he refused to keep them, releasing them to roam free once more. The labor, though completed, left a sense of lingering unease. The horses had been subdued, yes, but the story carried the memory of their ferocity, their unnatural hunger, and the hero who had faced them unflinching. For the listener, the tale is both thrilling and oddly hypnotic. The chaos, the tension, the methodical calming, and the slow march of power under control create a rhythm that pulls one into the narrative and, eventually, into a meditative, almost sleepy state. Scholars often read deeper meanings into this labor. The mares of Diomedes represent untamed instincts, the dangers of unchecked cruelty, and the necessity of confronting the consequences of tyranny. Hercules' triumph is not just physical, it is moral and psychological. Strength alone could not have sufficed. The hero needed understanding, patience, and courage in equal measure. In this way, the story teaches a lesson that goes beyond myth, that the wildest forces, whether in nature or in humanity, can be tempered by wisdom and resolve. As night falls on the tale, the rhythm becomes mesmerizing. First, the furious stamp of hooves, then the heated snorts and flashes of teeth. Next, the calm under the hero's hand, the measured steps of submission. Over and over, the tension rises and falls, creating a slow, soothing cadence. Even the violence and danger of the labor, when told in this gentle, drawn-out manner, becomes a part of the sleepy lull of storytelling. The listener can feel the pulse of action, then the gradual release, until the mind drifts, following the hero and his monstrous horses across plains and hills into the quiet of night. Hercules, having subdued the mares of Diomedes, once again proved that his combination of courage, strength, and intelligence was unmatched. Yet the labor reminds us that heroism is not just in defeating monsters, it is in facing cruelty, taming chaos, and restoring balance in a world too often ruled by fear. For those hearing the story in the dim glow of evening or the gentle hum of a fan, it is enough to follow the slow steps, the careful guidance, and the final calm, until even the fiercest beasts seem to settle, and the listener's mind drifts into sleep alongside the hero and his now tamed herd. After taming the mares of Diomedes, Hercules found himself tasked with a labor that was quite different from any he had faced before. This time he was to journey to the distant land of the Amazons, a nation of women warriors famed for their skill in battle, their discipline, and their unyielding courage. Their queen Hippolyta wore a golden belt, a gift from the war god Ares, and a symbol of her authority and power. Eurystheus demanded that Hercules bring this belt back to him, perhaps thinking that it was simply another object to seize, another item to count as a labor. Yet this task was not merely about strength or ferocity. The challenge here required diplomacy, tact, and understanding. For Hippolyta and her people were not monsters, nor beasts, nor mindless adversaries. They were proud and skilled warriors, fully capable of defending what was theirs. Hercules approached the land of the Amazons with caution, aware of their reputation. He traveled over forests and rivers, through narrow mountain passes and open plains, until he reached their city, fortified and strong, with banners fluttering in the wind and women practicing with bow, spear, and sword in training grounds. The queen herself, Hippolyta, was an imposing figure. Tall, powerful, confident, her golden belt gleaming in the sunlight, a symbol of both her prowess and her authority. Hercules, who had wrestled lions, strangled serpents, and wrestled monsters from every corner of the known world, now faced a challenge of diplomacy, a task that required respect and careful words. When Hercules arrived, he spoke plainly, explaining that he had been sent by Eurystheus to retrieve the belt. Hippolyta, intrigued by this man who had achieved so many impossible feats, listened carefully. In many versions, she admired his honesty and bravery and agreed willingly to give him the belts. This, however, did not satisfy the gods. Hera, who had long sought to make Hercules' labors more perilous, intervened, spreading false rumors among the Amazons. She whispered that Hercules' intentions were dishonorable, that he had come to steal their queen and violate their lands. The nymphs and warriors, loyal to their queen, were incited to fury. Their training and skill now focused not on sport but on defense of their honor. What followed was chaos. Spears flashed in the sunlight, arrows whistled through the air, and shields clashed in a cacophony of sound. Hercules, as always, moved with both strength and strategy, deflecting blows, dodging attacks, and demonstrating a mastery of combat that was as precise as it was overwhelming. Hippolyta herself, misled by the rumors, entered the fray, a warrior queen in armor, spear in hand. Whether by accident or misunderstanding, she was struck down in the battle, an outcome that, in some versions of the myth, was unintended, a tragic result of deception and confusion. Even in the midst of battle, Hercules maintained focus on his goal. He retrieved the golden belt, holding it carefully, aware of its significance, not merely as a piece of adornment, but as a symbol of leadership and power. As he departed, the Amazons recovered from the initial chaos, their anger tempered by recognition of Hercules' honor and courage, though the loss of their queen left a shadow over the tale. The labor was accomplished, yet it carried with it the weight of tragedy and the reminder that even the strongest hero must contend with the machinations of gods and the consequences of miscommunication. The journey back with the belt was not uneventful. Hercules moved through forests and hills, mindful of the wrath of Hera, who often sent storms, obstacles, or minor monsters to delay him. Yet the hero's patience, endurance, and keen judgment guided him forward. Every step was measured, every obstacle anticipated, and every challenge met with a combination of force and intellect. The golden belt, now in his possession, symbolized not only victory but the careful navigation of diplomacy, courage, and ethical responsibility. A labor as much about understanding human or Amazonian behavior as about physical might. Scholars have debated the meaning of this labor for centuries. Some argue it reflects the tension between power and morality, illustrating how even heroes must negotiate honor and respect when dealing with civilized societies. Others see in Hippolyta and her Amazons a representation of the unknown, a test of Hercules' ability to approach challenges without defaulting to violence. Still others suggest that the labor demonstrates the hero's vulnerability to manipulation, showing that even someone as strong and accomplished as Hercules could be affected by deceit and rumor. For listeners, this depth adds layers to the story, making it both thrilling and contemplative, even as the tale drifts along the slow cadence of a bedtime narrative. The rhythm of the labor itself is hypnotic when told slowly, in the manner of a gentle recounting for sleep. First, the anticipation. A journey across foreign lands, the distant mountains and rivers of the Amazonian territory. Next, the intrigue. A queen both formidable and fair, a golden belt gleaming in sunlight, and the whispered deceptions of a meddling goddess. Then, the sudden chaos. Clashing weapons, startled cries, the swift movements of warriors, and the hero's calm precision amid danger. Finally, the resolution. The belt secured, the threat past, yet a quiet reminder of loss and the cost of conflict. Step by step, the narrative leads the listener into a state of gentle engagement, each paragraph a pulse that slows the mind even as the story unfolds. For Hercules himself, this labor was a reminder that not all challenges can be solved by force alone. Diplomacy, patience, and moral judgment are tools just as essential as strength. He had faced beasts and monsters, endured pain and exertion, yet here, among proud and skilled people, he had to rely on his wits, his respect, and his understanding of human or Amazonian nature. Even a hero who wrestled lions, tamed bulls, and subdued man-eating horses could find himself tested in the subtleties of negotiation and perception. The labor therefore occupies a unique place in the 12. It is both a measure of Hercules' ability to adapt and a reminder of the complexity of interacting with others who are strong, proud, and independent. By the time Hercules returned to Eurystheus with the golden belt, the king, predictably, was terrified of both the object and the hero who had obtained it. As usual, he refused to retain the prize, a reaction that became almost comical in its predictability. The labor was counted, the hero victorious, yet the reward remained out of the king's hands. For the listener, this adds another layer of rhythm and expectation. The slow rise of tension, the delicate navigation of danger, the inevitable triumph, and the king's cowardly reaction, repeated like a soft refrain that lulls the mind into calm focus. In the quiet of night, as this story is told for sleep, the narrative settles into a hypnotic cadence. The march across distant lands, the confrontation with warriors, the careful handling of a symbolic prize, and the slow, steady journey home all combine to create a rhythm that is gentle, deliberate, and immersive. The listener may imagine the golden belt glinting in the sun, the disciplined movements of Amazons, and the calm, measured strength of Hercules guiding events to their conclusion. Step by step, image by image, the mind drifts along the contours of the story, finding comfort in the predictable yet thrilling unfolding of each moment. Ultimately, the labor of the belt of Hippolyta stands out among the 12. It is a story not merely of strength, not simply of courage, but of honor, morality, and the delicate balance required when dealing with proud and capable people. It teaches that heroism is multifaceted. Sometimes brute force suffices, and sometimes wisdom, respect, and tact are equally vital. For those drifting toward sleep, the story's slow, rhythmic detail, its subtle humor, and its dry, almost understated tension make it an ideal narrative to accompany the descent into drowsiness, as Hercules once again proves his mastery over both challenge and circumstance. Once Hercules had delivered the golden belt and returned from the lands of the Amazons, Eurystheus, still plotting to keep him endlessly busy, assigned another labor. This time the task seemed almost impossible even by the standards of Hercules' previous labors. He was to retrieve the cattle of Geryon, a monstrous king who lived at the very edge of the known world. Geryon was no ordinary man, nor a creature easily bested. He had 3 bodies joined at the waist, 6 arms, 3 sets of legs, and a strength that seemed to come from some impossible source. He was a formidable warrior, his 3 torsos bristling with armor, each hand capable of wielding a weapon, and each step shaking the earth beneath him. The cattle he kept were equally extraordinary, enormous, powerful beasts, golden in color, and prized across the world for their beauty and strength. To approach Geryon was to enter a place where ordinary rules of nature and human courage seemed inadequate, and yet Hercules accepted the task without hesitation, knowing that this was yet another test of both body and will. The journey itself was extraordinary. To reach Geryon's distant island, Hercules had to cross deserts, mountains, and seas, traveling farther than he had ever ventured before. The sun blazed overhead, relentless and unforgiving, as if even Helios himself were testing the hero's endurance. In his frustration at the unrelenting heat, some stories tell, Hercules shot an arrow at the sun, an act of defiance that drew amusement rather than wrath from Helios. The god, entertained by the mortal's audacity, offered him a golden cup, a vessel in which Hercules could sail across the waters safely. This was no ordinary cup, but a shining, almost magical contraption, in which he drifted across the vast ocean, waves lapping against the vessel's sides, wind rustling softly as if urging him forward, until the island of Erythea finally came into view. Upon arrival, Hercules' first challenge was the guardian of the herd, Orthres, a two-headed dog whose ferocity matched that of any beast Hercules had encountered. Both heads snapped and snarled, foaming with hunger and aggression, while his body bristled with muscle and malice. The clash was immediate. Hercules, armed with his club and his experience from prior labors, struck with precision, each blow measured, avoiding the snapping jaws and lashing claws. Step by step, he subdued the creature, the sound of its furious growls gradually fading as it fell, and only then could he approach the herd without immediate threat. Even with Orthres defeated, the main challenge remained Geryon himself. The monstrous king emerged, 3 bodies moving in tandem, 3 sets of arms raised high, each grasping a spear or sword. The earth seemed to tremble under his feet. Every time Hercules struck one torso, the other 2 pressed forward, creating a surreal and terrifying image of a warrior that seemed unstoppable. But Hercules, armed with his club and his legendary strength, pressed on, striking strategically, evading the 3 sets of weapons, each move a delicate calculation of timing, power, and endurance. The clash lasted hours, the air filled with the echo of strikes, the grunt of exertion, and the sharp hiss of pain and fury. Finally, Hercules loosed a poisoned arrow, dipped in the venom of the Hydra, striking Geryon in the side. The monstrous king fell, 3 bodies collapsing as one, leaving the cattle unguarded. Retrieving the cattle proved another trial entirely. Unlike previous labors, these animals were intelligent, strong, and resistant to direction. Each step required vigilance. Their hooves struck the ground like hammers. Their horns jutted and clashed, and they occasionally tried to scatter, their instincts testing Hercules' patience and endurance. He led them carefully across mountains, rivers, and plains, his mind as engaged as his body, anticipating each unpredictable move. Along the journey, Hera, ever determined to make Hercules' labors more difficult, intervened. She sent floods to scatter the herd, swarms of biting insects to torment both man and cattle, and storms that threatened to sweep the animals into the sea. Each time Hercules gathered the herd again, patient and unyielding, walking alongside them, guiding their steps, his presence a constant, stabilizing force amid chaos. The journey back was long, and Hercules had to remain vigilant, even as exhaustion weighed heavily on him. Nights were spent under the stars, listening to the lowing of the cattle, the distant sounds of waves or forest creatures, resting just enough to regain strength. His mind drifted at times, reflecting on the enormity of the labor, on the repeated tests of endurance, strategy, and sheer perseverance. The herd, too, seemed to respond to his steady presence, gradually becoming calmer, moving in sync with his rhythms, a slow, hypnotic march across land and water. When at last Hercules arrived with the cattle at Eurystheus' palace, the king reacted in his usual fashion, terrified, cowardly, and dismissive. The cattle, so painstakingly gathered and protected, were sacrificed to Hera, removed from Hercules' hands, and the labor was counted but the reward remained elusive. It was a pattern familiar by now, yet the narrative itself carried layers of meaning beyond the king's fear. Scholars often reflect on the labor as a metaphor for the limits of mortal power in the face of divine will, the trials of persistence against overwhelming odds, and the journey to the edges of the known world both physically and metaphorically. Listeners can imagine the slow, steady rhythm of the cattle's hooves, the shimmer of their golden coats under the sun, the gentle lapping of the sea against the golden cup that carried Hercules across oceans, the clash of arms and strength with a monstrous 3-bodied king, and the endless march across plains and mountains. The labor is hypnotic in its repetition, terrifying in its details, yet soothing in its slow unfolding. Ideal for a bedtime tale where danger and triumph are balanced in measured cadence. In many ways, the labor of Geryon's cattle is a journey of endurance, strategy, and patience. Hercules' mastery is evident not only in his physical triumphs, but in his ability to anticipate, adapt, and persist. The cattle themselves, creatures of beauty and strength, respond to his calm authority, moving as a unit across lands that would challenge even the most experienced travelers. And in the end, while the immediate reward is gone, the labor leaves a story that resonates across generations. A tale of the hero who walked to the edges of the world, faced the unimaginable, and returned patient, strong, and unwavering. As night falls on this tale, the narrative itself slows, echoing the rhythm of the cattle, the rolling waves, and the gradual, inevitable march toward conclusion. The listener drifts along with Hercules, step by step, hoof by hoof, arrow by arrow, battle by battle, until the story itself becomes a gentle hum, a slow lull that guides the mind toward rest. The repetition of effort, the careful pacing of triumph, and the quiet resolution at the end are perfectly suited for sleep, allowing even the most complex labor to transform into a soothing journey, a slow march toward peace and quiet reflection. In this way, Hercules' journey with the cattle of Geryon stands as one of his most remarkable labors, not only for the danger and the monsters but for the endurance, patience, and wisdom required. It reminds listeners that heroism is measured in both strength and persistence, and that even when triumph is fleeting or the reward is removed, the journey itself carries meaning, rhythm, and a quiet, almost hypnotic satisfaction. For those listening in the stillness of night, the tale moves slowly, carefully, and persistently, guiding the mind into rest alongside the hero and his herd, toward a gentle sleep filled with imagination, wonder, and the slow, calming cadence of myth. After the grueling journey with Geryon's cattle, Hercules faced his final labor, a task that was at once the most famous and the most enigmatic: to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides. These apples were no ordinary fruit. They were gifts from Gaia herself, nurtured by the immortal Hesperides, the nymphs of the westernmost part of the world. The apples were said to grant immortality and were protected not only by the nymphs but by a fearsome dragon named Ladan, whose 100 heads watched ceaselessly, whose breath was said to burn like the sun, and whose coils were strong enough to crush any mortal who dared approach. To retrieve the apples required more than strength. It required cunning, courage, patience, and, in some ways, a willingness to negotiate with the impossible. Hercules began his journey westward, traveling over deserts, mountains, and rivers, across lands both familiar and foreign. The journey itself tested every ounce of endurance and willpower he had cultivated over the years. In some versions of the myth, he sought the guidance of Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold the heavens, knowing that the location of the apples lay in his domain. Atlas, whose arms bore the weight of the world, was a figure of immense power and patience, as eternal as the stars themselves. Hercules approached carefully, showing respect for the Titan, speaking plainly, explaining his labor and his need. Atlas, amused by the mortal's audacity and persistence, agreed to help, though the negotiation itself was delicate. Even the strongest hero had to tread carefully with one who literally carried the heavens on his shoulders. In an almost surreal arrangement, Hercules offered to hold the heavens temporarily, relieving Atlas of his eternal burden so that the Titan could retrieve the apples himself. Hercules' strength was unparalleled, yet even he felt the weight of the sky pressing down, a constant reminder of the immense responsibility he had taken upon himself. For a brief time, the world seemed to tilt, the clouds heavy with the pressure of infinity, as Hercules bore the celestial sphere, muscles straining, breath measured, sweat trickling down his brow. Step by step, he remained steady, unmoving, a hero of mortal endurance, confronting the endless weight of the cosmos. Meanwhile, Atlas, freed from his burden, moved to the garden of the Hesperides. The nymphs watched, wary and curious, while Ladon, the 100-headed dragon, stirred and hissed, its eyes flickering like distant torches, its heads twisting in anticipation. Hercules knew that a direct confrontation with the dragon would be perilous. Some myths suggest that he remained holding the heavens throughout, relying on Atlas' skill to retrieve the apples. Others say he had to face Ladon himself, using both cunning and strength to distract, evade, and ultimately bypass the dragon without provoking a deadly reaction. The suspense of this encounter, imagined in slow detail, carries a rhythm almost hypnotic. The measured movements of the dragon, the careful steps of Atlas, the unyielding presence of Hercules holding the weight of the world. Once the apples were obtained, Hercules had to negotiate again with Atlas, who, tempted by the prospect of freedom, initially attempted to leave Hercules holding the sky permanently. Yet the hero's cunning matched his strength. He persuaded the Titan to resume his eternal task, often by asking Atlas to take back the heavens just long enough for Hercules to adjust his grip, sometimes employing subtle trickery to ensure the apples remained in his possession. At last, the golden fruits were secured, each shimmering in the sunlight, each a symbol of immortality, power, and the completion of a long, exhausting journey. The return journey was slow and careful, the apples precious and fragile, their golden surfaces reflecting the sun, each step requiring vigilance. Hercules moved with the rhythm of someone who had faced countless dangers and emerged victorious, yet who understood the weight of responsibility that even a hero must carry. The narrative here unfolds gently, with attention to the small details, the glint of the apples, the movement of the clouds above, the gentle sway of trees as he passed, and the occasional lowing of distant cattle or the rustle of a forest animal. Each moment is deliberate, each action measured, creating a rhythm that both excites and soothes, perfectly suited for the long, slow descent into sleep. When Hercules finally returned to Eurystheus, the king, predictably terrified, hid from the sight of the apples. As if the simple presence of such a powerful object, handled by such a capable hero, might crush him outright. The labor was complete. Hercules had succeeded, having faced impossible journeys, monstrous foes, divine trickery, and challenges that tested his strength, endurance, cunning, and morality. Yet, as in so many of the previous labors, the reward was secondary to the journey itself. The tale leaves the listener with a sense of rhythm, pattern, and resolution, the rise and fall of tension, the careful unfolding of events, and the slow, steady march toward accomplishment. Scholars and storytellers alike note that this final labor is symbolic in multiple ways. The apples themselves represent the fruits of wisdom, the rewards of perseverance, and the ultimate prize of mortal endurance. The dragon-laden, ever vigilant, represents the obstacles that guard what is truly valuable, while Atlas embodies the eternal challenges of responsibility and strength. Hercules' success demonstrates the combination of physical power, mental acuity, moral judgment, and strategic patience, a combination necessary for all great endeavors, mortal or divine. For the listener, the layered symbolism deepens the tale, creating a story that is both mesmerizing and quietly instructive, ideal for bedtime reflection. The rhythm of this labor is hypnotic when told slowly. First, the long journey to the west, through lands strange and distant. Then the negotiation with Atlas, the weight of the heavens pressing down, a reminder of the hero's endurance. Next, the careful acquisition of the apples amidst vigilant guardians and the ever-present threat of the dragon. Finally, the measured journey home, with each step a gentle cadence, each breath a slow, steady pulse. Over and over, the pattern reassures the listener, allowing the mind to relax and follow the story's ebb and flow into a state of calm and drowsiness. In many ways, the labor of the golden apples completes Hercules' journey, not only physically but morally and spiritually. He has faced beasts and monsters, tyrants and deceit, natural and supernatural challenges. He has learned the value of patience, wisdom, and diplomacy alongside strength. He has navigated moral ambiguity, confronted cruelty and injustice, and demonstrated a capacity for endurance that transcends mere physical prowess. The story's slow, deliberate unfolding mirrors this. Danger is presented, addressed, and resolved in a pattern that soothes as it engages, guiding the listener step by step through tension and relief. By the end of this labor, Hercules' 12 labors are complete, each one a testament to different aspects of heroism, courage, strength, endurance, intelligence, morality, and cunning. The listener, having traveled with him across mountains, forests, deserts, and oceans, having faced lions, hydras, bulls, mares, multi-bodied kings, and dragons, and having navigated divine trickery and human treachery, can now relax into the final rhythm of the tale. The golden apples, safely in Hercules' hands, serve as a symbol not only of achievement but of the careful, deliberate mastery of challenge. As the story winds down, the mind drifts, imagining Hercules resting after his journey, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant lap of waves, and the quiet night settling across the lands he has crossed. The slow cadence of steps, the gentle hum of past battles, and the final triumph over impossible odds all combine to create a comforting hypnotic pattern. For those listening at the edge of sleep, the tale of Hercules' labors, culminating in the retrieval of the golden apples, becomes a lullaby of endurance, courage, and the quiet satisfaction of a journey completed. Hercules' story ends with a reminder that heroism is multifaceted, not only the triumph over monsters and tyrants, but also the ability to endure, to navigate moral and physical challenges, and to emerge stronger, wiser, and more measured. For the listener, the narrative's slow unfolding, careful description, and dry, subtle humor create a perfect cadence for the mind to follow into rest. Step by step, labor by labor, the hero's journey mirrors the rhythm of breath and pulse, drawing the listener gently, inexorably into sleep.